I've been told to watch the lines on
I
here.
know I have to watch the lines because I presented here before and I fell over through here. I'm not sure that really did do the study justice, sorry to say that, but I'm pretty assertive if you haven't guessed. We've been working on Benchmark for 2 years, and it's probably, and we've done it we've done it before and we're doing it again, but I'd suggest that this is probably the largest of its type. And it is cross-platform effectiveness, but on steroids. And it's called, today I'm going to actually share with you the 5th installment, which is very Star Trek-y, a bit like my dress. And, but I'm also going to, for those, and I did find somebody lovely in the audience earlier that hasn't seen the first 2 years of work. So I am actually going to kind of give you a little bit of an insight or a summary of what we've done, because it kind of happens in logical or chronological order. And then I'm going to take you through the 5th installment, which is about, interestingly, 2 platform buys and audience quality. So just for those who haven't seen it, we started 2 years ago, and the goal was essentially, that was when Think TV began, and they approached me and said, the pendulum is swinging and the money is moving away from TV and to digital, and we know that TV is valuable. How can you potentially help us to get that message out? And I said, well, as a professor that is supposed to be independent, we will have to do it in the way that essentially is rigorous and is fair. And what we wanted to do was to have a look at cross-platform performance in the way of ad cut-through and sales uplift. So at the end of the day, we know Brand Growth 101, if your ad doesn't cut through and it doesn't get remembered, pretty simple, and doesn't get remembered at the time of purchase, it has no impact. So we wanted to, I feel like our industry is so overcomplicated in a way, and when we actually take advertising back to its basic form, that's as simple as it is. Your brand has to get in front of a set of eyeballs for it to actually have any impact at all, and then if you're lucky, it'll nudge propensity. So we looked at ad cut through via a gaze tracking model, and we'll explain a little bit why we did that. So it's the company that I run is outside of the university. We build technology to facilitate scaled research and also to remove human bias. So interesting comment earlier about human bias and how 1/4 of car intenders actually buy. That's a classic example of measurement gone wrong, and how what you say you're going to do is very different to what you actually do. So we never use measures like intention, and recall is wrought with market share issues and things like that. So ad cut through, we used attention as a gaze tracker, and sales uplift, essentially we sent people to a virtual store situation. I'll explain it a little bit more in a minute. But sales uplift via product choice takes into account market share, right? So the reality is brands are going to be bought and sold, and people are going to switch in line with the penetration. And true product choice, we actually hold the baseline, which is what you would expect people will buy regardless, because recall usually defines, so bigger brands will get greater recall, full stop. So if you don't control for market share, any sales proxy or intention proxy or any of that kind of thing will naturally differ by definition, because of the different brands have different penetrations. So product choice has a baseline controlled by market share. Way went over the top with that one. Okay, so let me just quickly explain the technology, and it's hard to quickly explain this because it's quite deep. So we needed to essentially have a single source set of data that we could experiment with and control. So we built a collection app, which we've got a couple now, but in essence, basically what happens is a panel member will download our app onto mobile phone, tablet, PC, and we have done television as well, which we have done here, and we're going to continue to do it, where someone will actually put their camera in front of the television and our app streams the content to the TV, whilst then the camera in the device is turned on. So our app, so you download our app, with permission, it intercepts essentially the camera and switches it on, and it takes facial footage depending on when the ads are inserted, etc. The other thing it can do, so the code that sits behind our collection app, so then you either go to Facebook, YouTube, Twitter, whatever we're testing at the time. In this particular case, it was it was Facebook, YouTube, and in some cases BVOD. So it sends you to, and you log on. We don't collect any personal information in case there's any press in the room, and we can actually intercept ad load, right? So with cross-platform testing, it's really important because better ads do have a higher rate of impact, and that's because emotions cut through and you're more likely to notice it, for example. So it's really important if you are doing cross-platform effectiveness, you have to isolate all the other things that it might be. So we felt it fair to make sure that the same ads, the same creative were across all different platforms. So to do that, our app essentially goes from our creative bucket and drops them or intercepts ad load on Facebook, YouTube, and in some cases BVOD. So we pull out a targeted piece, for example, and replace it with the ads that are, I think we had 15 or 17 of them in our creative bucket. In fairness, we made a decision right back 2 years ago to take the ads that we were using, not just general TV ads, right? We actually took them from our YouTube session, and we then used them across the different platforms. So that's really important, because some of the questions I've had was, well, if you put a TV ad on Facebook, of course it's not going to work. Well, we didn't. The other thing that this app does is it also, because we're intercepting ad load, we're actually obviously tagging it. So we can tell, how long it's been on screen, the level of pixels, the level of coverage, which is, so pixels is how much of the ad is on screen, whereas coverage is how much of the screen the ad covers. And as I said, the camera is switched on. So they go to their platform of choice. Literally, they would have no clue what we're doing. We don't tell them that we're intercepting ad load. They've double opted in, I might add, and we're filming them. And once they've finished their session, depending on the particular study that we've done 22 studies, by the way, in the last 2 years, 22 different groups. They then go, their session stops, they go to a virtual store where we've set up essentially the products in categories with competitors so that they can make a choice from this shelf. And again, we then use our market share data and look at a true uplift, right? So it's real uplift. It's not just any sales. And then all of that data, so we've got all of our choice data, and then we've got all of our viewing data, so it's not only the tagged stuff, but it's also facial footage, goes back through our stack, and we transpose. So we've built a couple of gaze models where we can tell if they're looking at the screen, and if they're looking at the screen, whether they're looking at the ad or not, or whether they're turning away. With the TV model, which was further away, obviously we tried to replicate it as best we can, so we can see, and with television the ad's on full screen, so we can kind of tell if they're just looking away for a split second or whether they're not in the room, etc. So it's a pretty decent, robust, single source, well-controlled process. Did I just do something? Thank you. So I think, just let me recap quickly and then we'll move into the fifth instalment. And essentially how we do this is we collected 5 frames per second. And so what we decided to do, to be fair, so that we, because some ads are played for long. I mean, TV ads are watched generally longer than on Facebook. That's not new news. So we wanted to kind of replicate and look at it on an average second level. So if you think of 100% being, if it was 100, if the score was 100, you would be actively looking at that ad, not anywhere else, and your score would be 100. So what you can see is, in an average ad second, we found consistently that television on TV and also on mobile was consistently higher attention in its sense. So what that says is that of potential 100% active viewing, about 58% of the time you were kind of either actively viewing or slightly passively viewing, which means that you're just looking away for a split second. Or in the case of Facebook and YouTube, you were reading comments or looking at your feed, etc. So what we also found is, over the last 2 years, we've tried to answer the questions that people have been asking over time. So Kim commissioned a second group so originally we just did TV on TV, and we did, at the time, the first round was Facebook and YouTube on PC. And obviously a couple of years ago, then, mobile first, etc., we were encouraged to have a look at the same work, but do it on mobile. And what we found, because obviously, the likes of Facebook will say to you, well, we're optimized for mobile, so clearly that's going to improve our chances, and it does. Let's be fair, it does. But when you look, we were fair to television as well, and we ran a BVOD session, the average attention goes up for them as well. So the device, without a doubt, does play some of a role, and we can it's pretty obvious. If you leaned right into it, clearly there's going to be a lot more active viewing in that space. But device is not a platform thing. The benefit of TV transcends to the mobile as well. So, for those of you who have seen the work we've done on the viewability space, we looked at pixels, and we also looked at, let me just check if that's pixels. We also looked at coverage, because quite a few years ago, it just floors me how people are happy to pay for 50% of your ad on the screen for only 2 seconds of time. I don't get the viewability standard. I've been up, I understand the MRC, and I understand that there has to be somewhere in the middle that's fair to platform owners and fair to advertisers, but I don't get why you would actually pay more for half. But what we wanted to have a look at and see is if the relationship between viewability and sales, or viewability and attention. So if you see an ad for less, what does that really mean for your impact? So let's start with the first, and again, this is pretty stock standard, straightforward, but this is coverage. So again, coverage is how much of the screen the ad covers. And if you think about a television experience, 100% of the time, 100% coverage. Whereas you can see the real estate in Facebook and YouTube with PC versus mobile. So obviously for Facebook, on a mobile screen, they get rid of all the peripheral. It's just clearly it's just the feed. So that's a good thing that they did, because essentially they increased their coverage quite considerably, but it's still nowhere near. And studies around clutter from years prior talk about how, when you are distracted and the ad is not right in your face. In some ways, I guess that's why cinema does so well in terms of the experience. Unfortunately, their reach isn't quite the same as TV, but it's a massive big screen and you can't sort of get away from it. And secondly, we also see this is about pixels. So 100% of the time, 100% of the ad is played, which is the same. So coverage and pixels are very related, obviously, but you can still have a 100% pixel on Facebook, but it only be 30% of the screen, right? So they're related, but one definitely extends the value of the other. So in this case, this is pixels. So these are just descriptives. The important thing is what it really means in terms of sales uplift, which at the end of the day is the gold dust. So again, without kind of going into too much detail, this essentially means that where 100 is a base, so we found that the good news is that most video does actually render or nudge a sale, which is great news, above 100. So this is good news for all video. But by far, television was found to deliver more sales uplift than other platforms. And it was exactly the same direction in the mobile groups. So again, where attention goes up, typically, so does sales. Not always, but typically. So we kind of say that small screens are beneficial for all TV platforms, and I know there's been a lot of discussion even today about that's, where television, I watched Maths last night on my phone because I missed the main show, just saying. It says something about me. So the important point there is that TV's lowest STAS device outperforms the best of the online groups on mobile, right? So there's something to be said. There's still some magic. We haven't quite yet looked into programming, but apart from the viewability angle, we're pretty convinced that it is still about the engagement of the programming. And we can see some evidence of that. Like, I know there was some discussion earlier about ads within the programming or within the content. So we didn't include that as a summary, but we did that, and we could see quite considerably that the attention was higher, and so were the STAS scores. So we can see that too. And there's something to be said about being grossly engaged. Gross is probably not a good word. Really engaged with the programming that you're watching. Well, grossly might refer to Maths, because I was grossly engaged. So again, as a researcher, all that I'm interested in is, why is this happening? Why is attention higher? Why is STAS higher on different platforms, on different devices? And as a starting point, we definitely can see that visibility matters. If all else fails, make sure that you, in all cases, try to buy platforms against the most pixels and the most coverage for the most time. And in this case, this is television because it's constant. So in our summary, visibility was crowned king. And then we also had a look at some other components of reach quality. So, obviously we're all kind of very connected into Les Binet and Peter Field's work. And so short-term advertising strength is that. It's about a moment in time, and in fairness, these people, they did their viewing experience and then they were sent to a store pretty much straight away. And that doesn't happen all the time. You don't kind of go, I see this ad now and I'm literally 5 minutes from the store, I'm going to go and buy all of these things right now. So we wanted to test true decay, advertising decay over time. And what we did was we ran another series of groups, but essentially we did the same thing. So we looked at TV on TV, TV on mobile, BV on mobile, TV on PC, Facebook on mobile, YouTube on mobile. But essentially we sent a whole bunch of new people to a viewing experience and sent them to the virtual store on that same day. And then within 14 days, we asked the same people not to view it again, but to go back to the virtual store and make another choice. And it was all randomised, so there's no, as if you're going to remember, 14 days later exactly what you were buying and where you were going anyway. And the same with 28 days. So we wanted to sort of understand, and it's a bit of a long story, but in literature, that's the best way to consider if it's had an impact on memory, looking at the decay over a 28-day period. And what we found was really interesting, that the length of time that an ad on TV continues to impact sales far exceeds that of Facebook or YouTube. So what you can see is there's like a slope or a decay slope. So the first impact represents that first line, and then as the 14 days, so it's modelled out or calculated out. So from memory, Facebook decays 2.5 times and YouTube decays 3.5 times faster, right? So at 28 days, you still have a sales impact on TV, and that's for both BVOD and TV on mobile, which we did it 2 different ways. It's a bit of a long story. So we did it through programming alone. So we sent someone they got to choose a program and watched it as a typical TV. And then other times we actually sent them to, I think it was 10play or one of those, and they then sort of surfed it themselves. But in both cases, the impact far exceeded by a long shot that of Facebook and YouTube. And if you actually have a look at that, the retention is so strong that even at 28 days, it generates the same sales uplift as the initial impact for Facebook and YouTube on mobile. So that's pretty amazing. So there's some memory right there. So I'm happy to share this for those who haven't seen it, but essentially what it says is that TV takes 9 times longer to decay to the 0 point than the competitors, which, if you're paying and you're paying for an impression, then that's kind of what you want. This one actually included the TV screen, whereas the previous slide didn't. But TV on TV, there is some magic around it. So we're all talking about that the mobile screens are fantastic and they deliver great stats and great attention, but there's some magic to be had around TV on TV. And, you know, we can't clearly explain it, okay, because the visibility element is on both platforms, on both devices, but there is something about the magic of TV, whether it's the environment, we're yet to the programming, although that's consistent across BVOD, but TV on TV, by far, has the longest memory retention, which is exciting. 103 days longer in memory than Facebook on mobile and 99 days longer than YouTube on mobile. So again, we know there's a visibility angle in there, but there's something more to it. The other thing we can see is this concept of double jeopardy, which I won't talk about in too much detail, but essentially we can see TV wins in two ways, in that it gets more stats up front, and by default, you know, it has a longer decay rate, so the slope is different, but at the same time, because it's higher in stats up front, the tail is longer as well. So it's this double jeopardy. Get higher stats up front, you'll generally have a slower decay point. Okay, so there's 2 years of my life in 10 minutes. So this is the newest work, and I don't have a clock, so I have no clue where I'm at, just saying. But I guess what we've tried to do is, as I said, every time we present this work, we try and answer questions by doing another piece of work. Because there's nothing to hide, right? We're trying to be fair to all platforms. We're trying to understand it like everyone else. So, you know, I've been asked things about mobile. What about mobile? What about CPM? We did a big piece on CPM and it got into the Financial Review, and that went all over the world, which was crazy. You know, we were asked to do, you know, what about long-term memory? So you're only doing short-term memory, what about long-term memory? We did that. And one of the things that keeps popping up is, what about a two-platform buy? Right, so if you have one ad on TV and one ad on Facebook, what happens? Because that must help. Frequency, you know, if you hit them over the head, they're going to buy twice as much. So, did you see my face? That was my... So what look, standing up here, there are probably different methods to do this, and I know that the panel was saying before that there is data for this kind of work where you can see how many clicks were done with two, and et cetera, et cetera. But we're talking about a sales uplift. So pretty sure there's not a lot of real data out there with single source across two platforms with real sales uplift. So what we did was another group. Essentially, we didn't do attention in this case, but what we did do is we streamed the creative or the programming. So people were given a choice of which, with Ellen or Chicago Fire, or there were about 8 of them, with our programmed ads within those sessions. So they watched TV sometime during the day. We then asked them through our app to go to either BVOD, Facebook or YouTube, depending on which one they were more comfortable with. So we didn't send people to YouTube who've never used it before. Similarly, we didn't send people to BVOD who've never used it before. And then again, they would have seen through our app, we would have intercepted ad load with those same pieces of content. And we've done it through, like, all the ads have stayed the same for the last 2 years, and then sent them to the discrete choice. So they had, you know, we didn't say straight away. We said at some time during that same day, can you do the second viewing? And then they were sent to the virtual store to see whether it improved the impact, essentially, because I think that's about as close as you're going to get to real life. So the way we looked at this was, how do we measure success here? So what we did is we went, well, we know what the first platform STAS is. We know what the second STAS platform second platform stas is. So theoretically, if you were going to do a 2-platform buy, you wouldn't spend twice as much. You'd spend the same money and split it, right? So we went, well, let's do what we would call an expected stas. So we recalculated the stas, and essentially it's a bit more complicated than an average, but it's close enough to it. This is what you would expect, because you can't expect 2 views to generate twice as many sales. And the reason why that, we were having this conversation this morning, that the first impact is essentially the one that does the job in essence, and the second one typically, there's diminishing returns. So what we actually found was quite interesting. So TV on TV and TV on VVOD, without a doubt, was the best combination, right? So the combined stas was super high, so 172, which we were a little bit surprised about, because that's quite a lot higher than we would have expected, than if you had a single impact or a single impression on TV by itself or separately TV on BVOD. But the others were kind of hovering and a little bit lower than we expected, but kind of hovering around, really not much better than the second platform stas alone. So I think the more important point here is that the combination of TV on TV and TV on BVOD is twice as much impact than the others, but also it's hard to kind of put your finger on it exactly, other than we know that those second platforms are poorer performing, and we knew that from the start, and that in essence what we see is that it drags down the performance of the impact by the nature of, its visibility or its poor visibility, etc. So we kind of say poor performing platforms drag down the stats that could have been achieved even by simply putting it on TV once. So if you have a look, 135 and 130 is lower than a single impact measure from just one ad. So we kind of talk about, sure, there is some synergy there, but it's a bit of a false economy, in that if you're not really gaining much, then if you were putting it, in fact, not at all, then if you're just putting it on a single platform, where's the value? So we kind of say best to stick to the highest performing platforms for all reach points, period. And then we kind of have a look at, so this is, straight from my training at Ehrenberg Bass, but we kind of go, well, is the 2-buy thing valuable? And the only way, and they were talking a little bit about duplication viewing, in that, this whole concept of unique reach, and, there's no point banging people over the head twice with duplicated reach, etc. So we wanted to have a bit of a look to see particularly whether there were light buyers that, whether one audience skewed to lights or heavies. And the reason why we did that is because we know that brand growth comes from nudging light buyers, not attempting to increase loyalty. You would have seen this a million times. So if you buy media that skews towards heavy buyers, you're essentially limiting, the audience quality is limited, regardless of how much unique reach there is, right? The audience quality limits the opportunity for you to grow your brand because you're essentially hitting heavy buyers. So a smaller part of this tranche, but what we did find is that, now this is a classic, it was claimed penetration, so it's not straight from Nielsen or anything like that, but it's pretty close to what you would expect. So Facebook is the biggest platform, then TV, and then YouTube, and Instagram, Snapchat, and we did actually quite a lot of others as well. And looking at the sample of light buyers, everything looks good there. So you can see that it skews in line with market share, which is what you would expect, except for this one. So now, I know that's not a huge drop, but it should be sitting at around 42, 43, given its penetration is greater than the television platform. So just a bit of a caution there. It slightly skews to heavy buyers relative to the size of the platform. So it's a bit off in that way. And this kind of takes me back to some of the work that I did a few years ago, actually. And you may have seen this was presented in the AFR. Not AFR. I can't remember, my brain. That's going to bother me now. I hate that. So it was in a journal article, it was in Journal of Advertising Research or something. So essentially, a few years back, so essentially, again, all media that you buy should skew towards light buyers in that category and not towards heavies. So what we did look at was the concentration of buying in a brand community sense. So we picked 2 different categories. We picked chocolate and we picked, soft drink, but this is the chocolate data. And essentially what we found was that within this particular chocolate's fan base, this is what the concentration of buyers looks like. So, and it's kind of a no shit Sherlock moment, because if you're signing up for a community, you're more likely to be a heavy buyer of the brand. So that, when you're sort of investing in these brand communities, you're kind of eroding the opportunity to grow. But we're not picking on them. We found the same for these little guys, and we found the same for these little guys. And bearing in mind this was the same brand, and we did it across 2 categories, this is what happens when you look at the TV audience. So it's completely skewed opposite, which is more aligned to, and that's not spelt right, must have auto-corrected, Dirichlet norms, okay? So that's what you've got to need, you have to think about. So very long story short is the apparent advantages of gaining unique reach, because bigger platforms will offer some unique reach, but what sits below that is what you've got to watch. And due to the high penetration can be watered down by its reduced ability to deliver appropriate proportion of light buyers. So just watch that. So we say that every single reach point should be considered by its quality, audience quality, its ability to be seen. I also say its ability to be remembered over time, to deliver sales over time. So that's why we continuously say not all reach is equal. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that, Karen. We are going to move swiftly on in the spirit of time and lunch and people's stomachs. But that was excellent stuff. All those slides, lots of people taking photos, and they keep asking me the same question. It's being filmed, and the slides are available.
Yes.
We're happy to share them.
Sure.
Wonderful. So let's give Karen a big hand. Thank you very much for that.
They're all on the Think TV website
They're
as
on the
well.
Think TV.
Yeah.